For a long time, I thought income came from having the right product. That's the way most of us start thinking about business. If the offer is good enough, if the product solves a real problem, the revenue should follow. So naturally, most of the early effort goes into building something valuable, improving the product, refining the offer, making sure the result is actually worth paying for. And that focus makes sense at the beginning. But after operating a business long enough, something becomes difficult to ignore. Two companies can sell very similar products, and one grows dramatically faster than the other. It's not always because the product is better. Sometimes the difference comes from something much more structural. Who controls the audience? The moment you control access to the audience, income becomes far more predictable. That realization changed how I looked at business. Before that, revenue felt like something you had to chase repeatedly. Every sale required new effort, new marketing, new attention. If the marketing slowed down, the revenue slowed down too. The business was constantly pushing for visibility. And pushing for visibility is exhausting, because attention is one of the most competitive resources in the market. Then I started noticing how certain businesses operated very differently. They didn't seem to be chasing attention all the time. Instead, they already had it. They had an audience. People already listening. People already paying attention. People already interested in what the business had to say. And when those companies introduced something new, the reaction from the market happened much faster. Not because the product was magically better, because the audience was already there. When the audience already exists, selling becomes dramatically easier. That's when the importance of audience ownership started becoming clearer. There's a big difference between borrowing attention and owning it. Borrowed attention comes from platforms you don't control. Advertising networks, marketplaces, algorithms that decide who sees your product. Those channels can be useful, especially in the early stages. But they have one major weakness. The attention can disappear at any moment. An algorithm changes. Advertising costs increase. A platform shifts its priorities. And suddenly, the business has to rebuild its visibility from scratch. That's a fragile position to operate from. Owning the audience works very differently. When the business builds a direct relationship with the people paying attention, something important changes. Now the company doesn't need permission to communicate. It can reach its audience directly. New ideas, new products, new offers. Everything moves faster because the connection already exists. And that connection becomes one of the most valuable assets the business can build. I started noticing that many companies with enormous influence weren't necessarily the ones with the most complex products. They were the ones that had gathered attention over time. They had built communities, audiences, channels where people consistently listened to them. Once that audience existed, the company could introduce almost anything new and receive immediate feedback from the market. That's a very different starting point from launching something into silence. Because silence is what most entrepreneurs experience in the early stages. You create something and almost no one sees it. Not because it lacks value, because attention hasn't been built yet. That's why audience development quietly becomes one of the most important long-term strategies in business. Products change. Markets evolve. But the ability to reach people consistently remains useful across everything the company does. An audience is one of the few business assets that compounds with time. The more people paying attention, the easier it becomes to introduce new ideas. The easier it becomes to launch products. The easier it becomes to create momentum. I've also noticed something else about businesses that control their audience. They become much less dependent on any single product, because the audience itself becomes the foundation of the system. If one product stops performing, the company can introduce another. If the market changes, the business can adapt more easily. The audience remains, and that stability creates enormous strategic flexibility. Without an audience, every new idea must fight for attention. With an audience, ideas begin with visibility. That difference completely changes the pace of growth. The business stops spending most of its energy trying to be seen. Instead, it spends its energy improving what it offers to people who are already listening. Over time, that relationship deepens. Trust grows. And trust becomes another form of leverage. Because people who trust a business don't just buy once, they come back. They recommend it to others. They pay attention to future ideas. That's how the audience itself becomes part of the business architecture. Not just a group of potential buyers, but a long-term asset that strengthens everything the company does. Looking back, one of the most important shifts in thinking happened when I stopped viewing the audience as a marketing outcome and started seeing it as an asset worth building deliberately. Because income can fluctuate. Products come and go. Markets change. But the ability to reach people directly, people who already trust the voice of the business, becomes a powerful form of control. And control is what turns a fragile business into a durable one. Eventually, the question stops being, how do we sell this product? The question becomes something more strategic. Who are we building the audience for? Because once the audience exists, income becomes something the system can generate again and again. Control the audience, and you change the entire economics of the business.